Have you ever had a friend or family member move out of state not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't afford a house here in Hawaii? I had a childhood friend who lived right across the street from me. We would hang out every day. We would go to the park, and we would ride our bikes down to Times Supermarket to buy Flamin' Hot Cheetos. I thought we would be able to do that forever, for the rest of our lives. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. He ended up moving with his family. They loved it here, and they wanted to live here, but they just couldn't afford the houses here, and it was much cheaper to live on the mainland. Hi, my name is Rodney Agbayani, and today I'll be talking about how tiny home constructions can help with the affordable housing crisis we have here in Hawaii. Living in Hawaii is expensive, and for some of us, you either have to move out or suffer debt. And it's important now more than ever that we think about all the options that we have when it comes to affordable housing. And this includes a new trend, or a fairly new trend, called tiny home construction. Now, the definition of tiny homes aren't set in stone yet. However, Charlie Kilman, the author of the academic journal Small Homes, Big Impact, describes tiny homes as small buildings that combines living room, kitchen, and dining room all into one space to maximize all the space that they can. I've worked in the construction industry for over 4 years, and I'm currently working on affordable housing developments here on Oahu. Today I'll be talking about 3 things. Just how expensive it is to live in Hawaii and how much a house can cost. I'll elaborate a little bit more on how tiny homes can function and how it is compared to a regular sized home. And then after that, I'll provide real world examples. Let's start how expensive homes are here compared to the US. According to a survey conducted by the US Census Bureau, the median per capita income for Hawaii is $33,882, which isn't too bad when you compare it to the national average. In fact, we're actually doing pretty good compared to the rest of the world, or rest of the states. Where the big issue is the cost of a home. According to the Honolulu Board of Realtors Market Report, a single family home in Hawaii costs $782,500. That's the median price. Whereas the median price for the nation as a whole is $320,000. You can see there's a large gap in between, more than $400,000. Let's say that I make $34,000 a year, and I put that entire amount of income into paying off my home mortgage, which is roughly the median price, $782,000. If I were to do that, it would take me 23 years just to pay off my home mortgage. Now, when you think about that, 23 years isn't a lot, but if you put your entire income, that's unrealistic. You have to factor in the cost of gas, food and groceries, utility bills, and your phone bill. It's just not realistic. Now, we know that how expensive it is to live in Hawaii. Owning a home in Hawaii is expensive, but it doesn't have to be with tiny homes. Here's a graphic representation of how a tiny home can be. In figure A, we have a 2,000 square foot space, which is roughly the size of a house in Pro City. Figure B is a 1-bedroom apartment that's currently being developed in Kapolei, which is 600 square feet. And on the right, figure C is the size of a tiny home. Now, just by looking at it alone, you can tell that a tiny home requires less land and less materials to build, making it much cheaper. And even if you were to look beyond that, if you were to fit tiny homes into the spaces allowed in the Pro City unit, you could fit 10 tiny homes. That's a complete village. Now, 200 square feet isn't a lot. So how do we expect to fit anything in 200 square feet? Here's a conceptual plan that I developed really quickly just to show how we can combine the living room, dining room, and bedroom into one space to maximize the amount of space that we're given. And here's a 3D view of it just to help you visualize it a little bit more. One thing about tiny homes is that they utilize furniture that are convertible. this dining top table would be on hinges and allow us to kind of fold it inwards to allow for more floor space. Now, it's easy to come up with these ideas, but living in them, not so much. So here are some real-world examples that I found in my research. Let's see. Now, in 2017, in Iowa, an Iowan teenager named Luke Thills spent his entire summer creating this tiny home, as you can see in the photo. He used materials from his neighborhood, donations he received from his neighborhood, and he tried to recycle as much material as possible, and he created a tiny home that's fully functional with electricity. It only cost him $1,500, which is far less cheaper than the initial amount that we described back in the median prices. Here's an interior shot. It is crammed, and tiny homes aren't meant for most people, but for those that can compromise space for affordability, this is an option. Another example of a tiny home in America, or tiny homes in America, is a Community First Village in Austin, Texas. It's a 51-acre site that houses 200 tiny homes and 7 communal bathrooms and laundry rooms. The purpose of this Community First Village was to supply homes for the homeless. This would allow them to have a community and shelter them. Here's an interior of what a community first tiny home interior looks like. Again, they combine the space of a living room, bedroom, and kitchen all into one, reducing the amount of material and land it would take to create one. As this presentation comes to a close, I hope you consider these takeaway points. Owning a home in Hawaii is expensive, and moving out of state may be the only choice for some of us, unless we compromise space for affordability. In the space of one single family home, we can fit a village of 10 tiny homes. It may not seem practical at first glance, but there are already tiny homes servicing entire communities around the nation. I'm Rodney Arbayani, and thank you for listening.